Welcome
to
the
European
Institute for
Asian Studies.
This is not the first meeting our institute has had on Bangladesh. In fact, one of our very first seminars, which took place in about 1991, dealt with Bangladesh and its relations with the EU. Also, about 12 or 14 years ago, we were very much honored to have an address given by Sheikh Hasina herself. Now, some background about Bangladesh. I'm informed that the name Bangladesh means something like the country of Bengal, or we might say Bengal land. However, Bangladesh comprises only the eastern half of what is the traditional land of Bengal, the western half now being part of India. This division, of course, dates from the partition of British India in 1947. Bengal, as you certainly know, is situated in the northeastern part of the Indian subcontinent, where the great river systems of the Ganges and the Brahmaputra meet and flow into what is appropriately named the Bay of Bengal. As a result, Bengal is a very fertile land. It is also the eastern gateway of the great Ganges-Jumna plain, which dominates northern India. It is thus of great economic and strategic importance. Bengal has its own language, Bengali, and a long history which give Bengali people, whether they're from Bangladesh or the Indian part of Bengal, a distinct identity. Now, in a few minutes, I want to try to give you a very brief examination of Bengal's history. Bengal's history can be divided into 4 periods. Now, those of you who are here from Bangladesh don't have to listen to this because you're supposed to have learnt this at school. 4 periods. An early period which lasted till about 1230 AD. That was the pre-Muslim period. Then a Muslim period which we could say lasted from about 1230 to 1737, a very key date. Then what we might refer to as the colonial period, from 1737 until 1947, or depending, 47, colonial period for us. 1757, what did I say?
You said 37.
No, 1757 to 1947, and finally the post-colonial period since 1947. I will go very, very, very briefly over the first 3, and then concentrate rather more on the post-colonial era. Now, in the early first millennium BC, there was a kingdom which roughly corresponds to today's Bengal, amongst several other kingdoms. However, it was incorporated by a neighboring kingdom which was called Magda, centered on Bihar, the capital of which is now what is called Patna, which is the capital of Bihar. Some heads are nodding. This gives me great encouragement. Bengal was then incorporated into a series of great Indian empires. There was the Nanda Empire, which lasted from 424 BC to 321 BC. The Mauryan Empire, which lasted from about 322 to 185 BC. And the Gupta Empire, which lasted from 320 AD to 550 AD. Then there was a period under what was called the Pala dynasty, which was itself based in Bengal. This is sometimes referred to as the Golden Age of Bengal, and lasted from about 750 AD to 1174, and was followed by a Hindu dynasty called the Sena Empire, which lasted from 1070 to 1230. Now, under the Pala dynasty, there was a lot of emphasis on Buddhism, but the Sena dynasty was reverting to Hinduism. And during this time, Islam was first introduced into Bengal by Arab merchants. Only by Arab merchants, but it started to take root then. In 1206, a combination of Afghans and Turks conquered northern India and formed what was called the Delhi Sultanate. And the Delhi Sultanate, under a number of dynasties, lasted until 1526. So we've already now covered 2,500 years in about 4 minutes. That's pretty good going. However, already during this time, from about the 13th century onwards, the Sultanate of Delhi was weakened, and an independent Sultanate of Bengal was established. So again, Bengal became an independent entity. The Delhi Sultanate was finally overwhelmed by the Mughal Empire under Babur. And Babur's second successor, Akbar, annexed Bengal in 1526. Sorry, between 1574 and 1576. And it is interesting that the following year, in 1577, Emperor Akbar permitted the Portuguese to make a first settlement in Bengal. This was the first settlement of Europeans in Bengal, 1577. Now, Bengal at this time was the richest province of northern India, the richest province. It was noted particularly for its textiles and especially its silks, but many other things, and of course an abundant production of rice. So Bengal was very rich under the Mughals. However, the Mughal Empire declined and was weakened by attacks from the Marathas who come from what is now Maharashtra in western India. And they invaded and ravaged Bengal between 1742 and 1751. 1751. It destroyed the economy of Bengal and very much weakened the state. The Marathas were actually crushed in 1761 by the Afghans at the Battle of Panipat, but that's by the way. But they largely disappeared after that. During this time, Calcutta had been developed by the English East India Company late in the 17th century with the permission of the Mughals. And then a problem arose between the local ruler of Bengal, the Nawab of Bengal, who by that time had become more or less independent of Delhi. And there was a conflict between the Nawab and the British East India, the English East India Company, which led to the famous Battle of Plassey between the East India Company small army under Robert Clive and the Nawab's army, which was defeated. It's very interesting to note that the Mughal emperor actually sent an army, a large army to Plassey, which never took part in the battle. Had they intervened on the side of the Nawab, Robert Clive's army would no doubt have been crushed, but they didn't, and it wasn't. And from 1757, we now move from what I call the Muslim era to the colonial era, because the East India Company then took charge of Bengal, and from Bengal they moved further and further up the Ganges Valley until they reached Delhi and the Punjab and other parts of India. And by 1757, most of India became under the rule of the East India Company, except for a number of princely states which retained some sort of relationship with the British. And in 1757 there came what is known as the Great Indian Mutiny, or, as some people refer to it, the Great War of Independence. As a result of that, the British were victorious after a long struggle, but the East India Company was then relieved of its responsibility for ruling India, and there was direct rule by the British. So we now come on to the third period, which is the colonial period. The British established an effective system of administration and justice. They built railways and bridges, and while Bengal's jute sector grew, textiles in general were undermined by cheap mass-produced cotton textiles from Lancashire in England. Somehow it's the other way around today. Also, insufficient attention was given to the development of agriculture. And as late as 1943, during the war against the Japanese, there was the Great Bengal Famine, in which 3 million people died. Moreover, lack of opportunities for Indians in the administration led to the growing movement for independence. So now we come to the fourth period, the post-colonial period, which came in 1947 with independence, which was accompanied by partition. Almost 1/3 of the population of British India by this time were Muslims. They had converted over the many centuries. The rest were mainly Hindus. Now, Ali Jinnah's Muslim League demanded a separate state for the Muslims, and the result was partition. In the west, the provinces of Sindh, Baluchistan, the northwest frontier province, being almost wholly Muslim, became automatically part of Pakistan. The Punjab was mixed, so the western Punjab went to Pakistan, the eastern Punjab to India. In the east, the same applied to Bengal, which had a high proportion of Muslims, but also there was a large proportion in neighboring Bihar and in Uttar Pradesh. Bengal was thus divided. This land, which had been one undivided land for centuries and centuries and centuries, became divided. The eastern part became East Pakistan with its capital in Dhaka, and the western part became the Indian state of West Bengal. Now, this was not only a political division, it was also, of course, an economic division. When you divide a territory which has been united for centuries and centuries, you cause a total disruption of the economy. And the eastern part of Bengal was cut off in particular from the great commercial center of Calcutta. So now we come on to the final part, and I've only got 3 or 4 minutes left. Although East Pakistan had a much smaller area than West Pakistan, it had a slight majority of the overall population of Pakistan. However, Pakistan became led, if you like, by a military landowning elite from West Pakistan, and largely from the Punjab. The language of the old Mughal army, Urdu, was adopted as the sole language of Pakistan, which very much upset the people, the Bengali-speaking people of East Pakistan. This was really the beginning of the rupture. The Awami League was founded in Dhaka in 1949, the minister's father being a founder member of the party. It opposed the Muslim League. In the 1960s, under Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the Awami League campaigned for autonomy, genuine autonomy for East Pakistan. Pakistan was by this time under military rule. It had 2 succeeding military rulers, General Ayub Khan from 1958 to 1969, succeeded by General Yahya Khan from 1969 to 1971. And Mujib was imprisoned between 1966 and 1969. In 1970 came the first parliamentary elections in Pakistan, where the Awami League won an overall majority, but was not allowed to form a government. Now, this led to great troubles in East Pakistan, and the Pakistani army was sent in to the eastern part. This led to the East Pakistan's War of Independence, where India joined in on the side of the Bengali rebels. And it led to the creation of Bangladesh. And Mujib became the first prime minister of independent Bangladesh in 1972. And in 1973, the Awami League won the first general election. There was, however, serious famine problems in 1973 to 1974. In 1975, there was a military coup against Mujib, and Mujib and most of his family were assassinated. There were further coups, and then in 1977, General Zia Rahman became president and founded the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, the BNP. But in 1981, he was assassinated. The same year, Sheikh Hasina, who was one of the few members of Mujib's family not to be assassinated at that time, she's the eldest daughter, returned to Bangladesh and became the leader of the Awami Party. In 1982, there was another military coup, and General Ershad seized power, ruling until December 1990. There was an election held in 1986 which was boycotted by the BNP. In 1991 only, parliamentary democracy was restored, and Zia's widow, Khaleda Zia, led the BNP to victory. In the elections in 1996, however, the Awami League won, and Sheikh Hasina became Prime Minister for the first time. In 2001, the BNP won, and Khaleda Zia came back into power. In 2006, there was a political crisis, and rather than a military takeover, there was a caretaker government. And in December 2008, another general election could be held, and the Awami League won a landslide victory. And Sheikh Hasina again became Prime Minister and is still Prime Minister today. That, in a very short few minutes, is a very brief historical introduction to Bangladesh. East Bengal, as I said, Bangladesh as it now is, was cut off from West Bengal. This was harmful to the economy. And an independent Bangladesh took the initiative to set up a process of diplomatic contacts with its neighboring countries, which led to the establishment of the SAARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, in the mid-1980s. And SAARC has developed its preferential trade area, SAPTA, and now its free trade area, SAFTA. So in a way, Bangladesh, East Bengal, is being reintegrated into a general economy of South Asia. Of course, there have been serious problems of poverty in Bangladesh, and in some ways this has been alleviated. If you look at the GDP per capita figures, which is about now just under $2,000, this is twice what it was in 1975, so there's been considerable economic growth. The problem is you have 161 million people, the 8th largest population in the world, living in an area of only 147,000 square kilometers, and very, very susceptible to flooding, bad storms, and climate change, of course. One thing that has helped the economy recently has been the growth of the textile sector, and Bangladesh is now the second largest exporter of textiles in the world after the People's Republic of China. But the textile industry suffers from very low wages, which is why big multinational companies want to go there, and poor working conditions, particularly in the field of health and safety. There have been a number of accidents and fires, and earlier this month there was this catastrophic collapse of the building where several textile companies operated, which has led to about 1,100 deaths. Who was to blame? Who was to blame? Certainly the owner of the building was to blame. Certainly the owners of the factories operating there were to blame. But one also has to consider the role of the Bangladeshi authorities in this, and also the role of the international companies, multinational companies, European and American companies, who have their textile, their garments made in such factories, and who did not pay attention to the safety conditions in those factories. Now, there is a gleam of hope, and more than a gleam of hope, because an agreement has been reached in which the International Labour Organization has played a very important role, and which a large number of companies have signed. And this is a binding agreement, and also is to provide a fund to help with inspections of factories. There are, however, a number of companies who have not signed up to this agreement, and two very important ones are from the United States, Walmart and Gap, which doesn't really surprise too many people. So that is basically what I wanted to say by way of introduction. And now I want to pass the floor to my friend Paulo Casaca. Before I do so, I would just like to say that he was for 10 years a member of the European Parliament. He is from Portugal. He was a member of Parliament for the Socialist Group, and when he left the Parliament in 2009, he quickly moved to set up this South Asia Democratic Forum, which we welcome very, very much. Fortunately, as I say, he only works a few hundred meters from here, so it is very easy to cooperate with him, which we have been doing and will continue to do. Paulo, I pass the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Dear Ambassador Ismat-Chan, dear ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, my first words are for congratulating the European Institute for Asian Studies for the opportunity of this initiative, and most in particular, my good friend, Dick Gupwell. I am deeply honored to have been given the opportunity to be side by side with one of the best representatives of a new South Asia. And for this time, actually, I did come from Portugal, and I will return from Portugal. But I would return, and I would come from the end of the world, if necessary, to profit of this magnificent occasion. Madam Minister, since your election as chairperson of the Commonwealth's Ministerial Action Group, you have been leading the way at the world stage for some of the most fundamental challenges humanity has been facing: how to combat poverty, unemployment, and fanaticism, empowering women, promoting tolerance, peace, democracy, and development. I thank the international community in general, but us in particular in Europe. We owe you much for your leadership on the issue of potentially hazardous green gas emissions, combat to poverty and unemployment. Allow me, however, to dedicate these few words to the issue that brought us here, and this is your own country plight for development and the strengthening of a state of law. The country your parents liberated just over 4 decades ago was in ancient times one of the cradles of human civilization, in many ways comparable with the Middle East Fertile Crescent, a region Europeans tend to think mistakenly, but less mistakenly, perhaps they do not think that much after Dick Gupwell's brilliant intervention in the beginning, as a unique source of world ancient civilization. The region that became Bangladesh was indeed one of the most remarkable economic and cultural centers of the world up to modern age, an age that, however, was not very kind to your country. A succession of unfortunate political developments set the road for a deep relative decay, cruel colonization, and loss of importance of what came into being Bangladesh less than a half-century ago. Hardly any other country can claim to have suffered so much for achieving its national liberation. Bangladesh national building was confronted with the biggest genocide committed after the end of the Second World War. Saw its founding father assassinated soon after with the imposition of military dictatorship, the local accomplices and perpetrators of the genocide escaping any persecution and thriving in the recently born country. Bangladesh was born with an obsolete and dependent economic structure, with some of the world's worst indicators of prosperity and human development, and with high vulnerability to natural disasters that devastated the country as it was being born. Victim of the Cold War realpolitik logic, inheriting economic insufficiencies, importing ideologies that brought fanaticism and terrorism, as well as military coups, your country had unfortunately little time to enjoy civil democratic governance. Still, vast as it is, the dimension of the challenges ahead and the way to do with human development goals, it is a fact. You have been already come a long way since you gained your independence, and I think no reasonable objective observer will fail to agree that Bangladesh is already able to prove wrong the predictions of the basket case scenario. In our globalized economy, Bangladesh is coming up the ladder of economic development in the harshest of the ways, specializing in industrial activities where competitiveness depends crucially on the salary and care of industrial workers. The recent tragedy of Rana Plaza was a shocking reminder of where an unregulated labor world can drive us. In the name of the South Asian Democratic Forum, allow me, Madam Minister, to address our most felt condolences to the relatives and acquaintances of the victims. Out of the tragedy, we are finally seeing most of the main actors to come to terms with their responsibilities. I would like in this circumstance to highlight the role of Christy Hoffman, Deputy General Secretary of the UNI Global Union, for her remarkable plight and achievements, forcing a considerable number of garment outlets to agree to open a system of security control. Trade unions, most in particular in mass industrial activities, are fundamental tools not only to defend the legitimate rights and aspirations of workers, but as well to defend basic human values and rights. The steps given by the Bangladeshi authorities into respecting the rights of workers, female workers, most in particular, to freely organize themselves in trade unions are indeed very positive. The present crisis, however, opened a very important and promising step into the way our world is governed. Whereas some spoke immediately of trade sanctions, and I think it is clear to all of us that the innocent Bangladeshi workers would be the main victims of such a ill-considered step, a growing majority of the world public opinion realized that each one of us has a role to play in ensuring human working conditions. Obviously, there are different levels of responsibility, but the world public opinion is realizing that if consumers take in due consideration the power they have, a lot can be achieved. Some years ago, an international circulation magazine revealed that out of the price paid by consumer for a coffee capsule, only 2% were to pay for the coffee. That is, 98% of the price of a consumer paid went to other things than paying for the coffee. This was the start of an important movement that made available to the public alternative forms of coffee trading. Similar calculations are now being made on the garment industry, getting to not so different results. Some of the calculations are telling us that an extra 8 cents paid for a t-shirt could guarantee the application of safety standards in the industry. As it was the case with coffee, we cannot expect the present conscience of the situation to be enough to overcome all injustices. But it certainly is a first step and an invitation for the participation of all of us. It is now fundamental that the European trade authorities will read carefully the message that the European public opinion is conveying. Europeans do not want to punish the Bangladeshi workers. Europeans approve the measures trade unions, some business leaders, and the authorities are taking. What is now necessary is a clear follow-up by the traceability of products, the labor conditions in their manufacturing, as well as their environmental impact. But as I have understood, your government is rightly thinking on what shall be done to develop your national economic fabric and to accede to new markets and opportunities. Our SADF survey on Bangladesh that we did in cooperation with Gallup showed a country where prevailing optimism on its economic prospects with a vast majority keen on developing cooperation within South Asia. Most importantly, Bangladeshis view education as the highest of the values. This is the key reason why we think Bangladesh has all the potential to overcome its challenges. According to the same poll, more than 90% of Bangladeshis see regional cooperation, for instance in water management, as a means to ensure better flood and drought control, clearly indicating the way forward to deal with this potentially divisive issue. In this context, together with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, SADF is preparing a conference on water cooperation in South Asia for next September, where we intend to bring policymakers and experts from both South Asia and Europe to discuss ways and venues to improve management cooperation in water issues. The most important condition for a successful and sustainable economic development is, however, the respect of and the functioning of a state of law. And here, the major problem faced by the country was its inability to try the perpetrators of the genocide of '71. The present Bangladeshi authorities resumed in 2010 the trial proceedings on the crimes against humanity committed in '71. These proceedings faced a wide resistance centered, not surprisingly, on the main instigators of the genocide who are still alive and are, for the most part, political leaders of religious extremist forces, but also on a very active lobbying at the international arena. Apart from the intense lobbying, sometimes most awkwardly performed by associations which were supposed to defend human rights, this effort to end the reign of impunity met a crescendo of terror actions, which started by the destruction of countless Hindu and Buddhist temples and persecution of minorities that evolved lately to the demand of the institution of blasphemy laws. This has been translated into an escalation of violence that, as we just learned, did not spare your own residence in Dhaka, Madam Minister, which was attacked while you were coming to visit us here in Brussels. We, at the South Asia Democratic Forum, we think Europe should have exactly the same policy towards genocide, the mass killing and brutalizing of people, regardless of the ethnicity, religious beliefs, or other motivations of the genocide perpetrators or of the victims. The life and integrity of the women victims of mass rape in Bangladesh are no different from those of the Western Balkans or Eastern Congo, as the life of the human being has the same dignity everywhere in this world. The widespread violence put in motion today by the genocide perpetrators of yesterday is a worthy reminder of the results of the logic of impunity. It can only assure the reproduction of the existing state of affairs. On the 17th of January, SADF organized a conference in the French Senate in Paris under the sponsorship of Senator Marie-Noëlle Lienemann to promote an event on the forgotten genocide. Given the public interest and the importance of the subject, we decided to promote, in cooperation with the University of Heidelberg and other associations campaigning for justice and human rights, to organize another conference on the subject, which will be held this summer. We intend to bring the most prestigious and credible international experts on genocide to give their opinion on the issue, to promote comparative studies with other genocide cases, and to help bring the public to the public knowledge the truth on this crime against humanity. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to end these introductory remarks in a different tone. In 2013, we are celebrating the first century on the attribution of the Nobel Prize in Literature to Rabindranath Tagore, the first Nobel Prize attributed to a non-European writer, poet, and philosopher. It is essential to celebrate the first century of Tagore Nobel Prize in Europe as a way to remind us of the richness of the civilizational heritage of the Southern Asian Fertile Crescent. On the occasion of the celebration of the 150th anniversary of Tagore Bus, jointly organized last year in Dhaka by Bangladeshi and Indian authorities, one of the promoters summarized the event by saying, "Tagore dreamt of a world without conflict." Individualism and humanity are recurring subjects in his writings. We should keep in mind that besides being a true patriot, Tagore was also a global personality. He is a major inspiration for the people of Bengal. And let me just add, as we are celebrating the 100 years anniversary of the European discovery of Tagore, we shall have him as well as the major inspiration for all of us, Europeans and South Asians, on the values of freedom, peace, diversity, and equal sharing of prosperity. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Dick Gupwell, for that very kind introduction. Director of South Asian Democratic Forum, Paulo, for being so good, so generous, and so kind, and I must say, also so correct about Bangladesh, about my country, about my people. Thank you so much. Distinguished audience, good afternoon to you all. I'm very pleased to be in your midst, particularly because the Institute offers an acknowledged track record on shaping European views on Asia, indeed including South Asia. As you might know, I'm in Brussels to meet the EU leadership and the Parliament to apprise them on the current situation in Bangladesh. I then thought of an interface with you as an added opportunity to share my thoughts and reflections on the challenges faced by and the opportunities before Bangladesh. In sharing with you a portrayal of the present-day Bangladesh, let me start with politics and society, and then turn to economy. Frankly, unlike a foreign minister, you won't find me falling short in addressing the key issues dominating the European public space these days concerning Bangladesh. Let me first turn to politics in Bangladesh. Through a free and fair general election at the end of 2008, Bangladesh Awami League took office with a near 3/4 approval of the electorate. In Bangladesh's electoral history, indeed democratic governance, such an approval was unprecedented. This was an expressed aspiration of the people for change. Going 4.5 years back, people, particularly the youth, supported us in taking a firm stance on ending a culture of impunity by conducting decades-old trial of war crimes. There were a number of other electoral pledges in our manifesto, but this particular pledge stood unique. As things stand, I would stress this alone is certain to define Bangladesh politics of today and of the days to come. In that context, the recent months have seen a marked concentration and exposure of the ultra-religious forces that Mr. Paulo did touch upon. While the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, our main opposition, has been asking for caretaker government, Bangladesh suddenly saw emergence of a new radical force, Hifazat-e-Islam. Early this April, they held a public rally at the heart of Dhaka's central business district and placed a 13-point demand. What is noteworthy of their demand is that they ask a radical role reversal of millions of our women. They ask women to stay off public space. They opposed a great bulk of progressive and secular measures of the state. They even called for abrogation of one of the last yet defining amendments to the Constitution. Their demands and public statements challenged plurality and secularism that the Constitution upholds. Simply put, not only were these demands regressive, but these clearly challenged the very basis of the fundamental principles on which the Bengali nationalism and the statehood of Bangladesh was formed 4 decades back. However, driven by our firm belief in upholding freedom of assembly, in spite of criticism, the government let Hifazat-e-Islam hold rally at the heart of Dhaka city. But as they placed their charter of 13 points, we responded in the public domain that most of those were regressive and even run contrary to the aspirations, dreams, beliefs, and practices of people at large. A month down the line, on 5th May, they laid a siege on the 6 entry points to Dhaka city. This was at the central business district where the central bank and the headquarters of the key commercial banks were located. The government again allowed them to hold their reportedly religious program, obviously within reasonable limits of the law. But throughout the day and proceeding to evening and late night, Dhaka witnessed a clear mayhem. Thousands of Hifazat leaders and activists resorted to unprecedented vandalism, arson, and destruction of public and private properties. They were actually intent on laying siege of the entire financial district and reduce it to ashes by the following morning. Unfortunately, many political parties got engaged in mobilizing their crack elements in creating complete lawlessness. Yet the law enforcement agencies exercised utmost restraint and forbearance and urged the Hafazat activists to refrain from their destructive activities and proceed with the prayer program as permitted. The mindless rampage and destruction went on till long into the night. They even burnt the Holy Quran and other religious publications, for instance. As we found the program going way beyond their pledged peaceful one, the enforcement agencies decided to remove the estimated 50,000 people who were on the streets. The agencies and forces were fully mindful of the risks and took highest caution to avoid any casualty. Before kick-starting the operation, they gave public warning through loudspeakers. In the process, non-lethal weapons like tear gas, water cannon, sound grenade, and as a last resort, rubber bullets were used. After the operation, within and beyond Bangladesh, some has been trying to claim that hundreds, if not thousands, were killed, as against just 11 dead bodies found. That included one policeman. Our attestation is attested by scores of private TV channels, in fact 23 of them, who were broadcasting the operation live. It is just unbelievable for the agencies and forces to use lethal weapons during the operation in such wide presence of the media. The state's actions and response, as any rule-abiding citizen across the world would bear, had to flush the Hafazat activists as an affirmation of the government's duty to protect public interest and public property. While doing so, the government was indeed mindful of zero tolerance to any form of excesses and human rights violation by the law enforcement agencies on the line of duty. I must say, all said and done, government has maintained a balanced engagement with Hafazat to consider any demand that would meet reason and in resonance with the established societal values in Bangladesh. Obviously, on a larger note, the developments and the whole episode puts the contemporary Bangladesh in front of certain obvious questions. One is for Bangladesh politics to uphold the aspired and noble values enshrined in Bangladesh Constitution. Hafazat and the political parties who supported Hafazat stand to challenge those sacred principles. Indeed, these are the principles that people across the political divide have stood for all along in independent Bangladesh. We therefore surely do not wish to see any dilution of the values and principles because of short-sighted political agenda of a few. While any political force is free to opt or pursue its political belief, if its practice leads to hapless acts which eventually become antithesis of their own professed ideologies, objectives and known activities, and end up hurting the state and society, that surely is not acceptable. Yes, in a pluralist democracy, the differences are just natural among the political parties, but as we did see elsewhere across South Asia over the past decades, when the political parties try to ride over populist, truly short-lived and most risky extremist viewpoints, the deep-seated social fabric and eventually finely articulated political and societal social structure takes hit. The damage done in the process often prove difficult to recover. Sometimes, in fact, can hardly be recovered. In the furtherance of the views of Hafazat, what was worrying was the attempt to project a popularly elected government of the day as one against Islam, as atheist. At the same time, in a globalizing and post-9/11 world, any state can ill afford to witness emergence of such radical views or forces. This is just not because the short and long-term economic gains are non-existent. This is more because that is not representative or reflective of the true image of 150 million plus people. This is what Bangladesh instead is known for: a tolerant Islam, majority subscribing to Sunni sect that asks for practice of Islam with moderation. In fact, the Islam that spread to our part of the world was Sufi Islam. We in Bangladesh, as much as friends of Bangladesh across the world, therefore observe these developments with caution. Dear friends, it would be useful also to consider the activities of the Jamaat-e-Islami Bangladesh, who have been rejected by the people, particularly the youth and women, for their radical interpretation of Islam. This is essentially to counteract the well-documented crimes against humanity and genocide committed against their very own people during the 1971 War of Liberation. There, let me thank you all in the international community, including human rights watchdogs, for remaining sensitized to such malafide campaigns and registering the truths as borne by eyewitness accounts and evidence. Dear friends, obviously contemporary Bangladesh political scene is in focus. It is often said the space for such unfortunate incidents has been created due to the absence of meaningful dialogue between the government and the opposition, especially on the issues of the modalities for holding the next general elections. As much as you already are aware, the incumbent government has never refused or shied away from dialogue. Prime Minister herself has gone on record to invite the leader of the opposition to dialogue a number of times in the past weeks, at whichever place appropriate. Obviously, our preference would be the Parliament, for we believe in making the seat of legislature effective and functional. We thus have been inviting the opposition to dialogue, ideally in the Parliament. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has also urged the opposition to join the next Parliament session in June and raise their demands for what they consider should be the modalities for holding free, fair, and credible elections, obviously within the constitutional framework. She further said the government would listen to those demands and would make every possible effort to realize those demands on reasonable and mutually agreed grounds. She has even presented a tentative outline of the potential form of the government that would work to support the National Election Commission during the 3 months interregnum for holding the elections. Her suggestion has been to constitute the interim government with elected representatives from major political parties. This is essentially to uphold its truly impartial and inclusive character. Where we are stuck is that the government's such overtures have not yielded any specific response from the opposition, at the least on the offer of dialogue. The opposition has rather imposed the condition of reinstating the caretaker government provision into the constitution for the dialogue to take place. Their response has so far been through a series of strikes, making a severe blow to Bangladesh GDP and millions of hard-working poor men and women. In this context, I should stress that the provision of caretaker government has been removed from the Constitution following a Supreme Court verdict and lengthy debate in the Parliamentary Committee. There is just no way to dispute that such judicial decisions from the highest court are inviolable and irreversible in nature. These must be complied with. Looking at the conduct of the opposition, it would be fair to say that this takes us to square one, to a situation where sheer political expedience and intransigence tends to prevail over the progress, well-being, and democratic rights of our people. The government of the day remains steadfast on dialogue and engagement. We have made it clear that there is no alternative to dialogue, and the sooner the opposition engages in dialogue, the better it would be for the nation to get it out of the spiral of violence and prevailing uncertainty. While I say this, we are cognizant of growing interest of the international community in seeing a secure and stable Bangladesh. Our friends in Europe have particularly telling us in having the next general elections held in an inclusive, non-violent manner. Please be assured that as the oldest political party of the country, with an impeccable legacy and sacrifice for democracy, our party is particularly mindful of that. In 2009, we assumed office through an internationally acclaimed elections. It would be a cliché if I say we assure you of holding a free, fair, credible election. Still, I would assure Europe and the international community most unequivocally that as a responsible government, we do not want to see the recurrent mindless violence that causes enormous sufferings to our people has a pernicious effect on our economy. We further affirmed the same to the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy, Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs, Oscar Fernandez Taranco, early this month in Dhaka. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in turn appreciated the Prime Minister's commitment to holding the elections in a congenial atmosphere with participation of all parties, and her offer of dialogue to the opposition to end the current political stalemate and violence. Our stance on any change in government by any unelected form goes even beyond Bangladesh. We also believe in the same for entire South Asia, which is why we mooted and got all the SAARC countries agree to a unique SAARC Charter for Democracy in 2010. And this is what also drives our well-known pronouncements in other forums, be that the United Nations or the Commonwealth. Linchpin of our electoral process is the National Election Commission. Over the past years, we have already taken a series of measures to further enhance independence, effectiveness, and credibility of this commission. The Election Commission has held over 5,500 elections at different tiers of the government during the past 4 years without a single incident of controversy or mismanagement. We are confident it would be able to deliver free, fair, and credible elections with the support of an interim government comprising elected representatives. As is the case in any other developing country, it is high time for the sound health and sustainability of democratic practice and culture in Bangladesh that we take the next critical step towards holding national elections under a political dispensation managed by elected people. We believe, having elections under caretaker regime for past few times, we now are in a position to hold elections independently and freely, as is the norm in other established parliamentary democracies around the world. In that context, we would be open to support from our friends in the international community towards ensuring the credibility of the entire election process. As in the earlier elections, particularly in 2008, we would be ready to welcome international and independent observers to observe our elections. We would suggest that the observers should be on the ground not just during the elections, but also in the run-up to the elections and even following the elections. In our experience, observance of the electoral system along the entire spread would secure the confidence of our friends. Dear friends, late last month, I was in Geneva for a universal periodic review of the human rights situation in Bangladesh at the Human Rights Council. It was a most humbling experience as the world praised and recognized the all-encompassing progress we are making in human development, social sector, and human rights in spite of so many constraints and limitations. There was another reason. The Council also acknowledged profusely the work underway in the International Crimes Tribunal Bangladesh and the verdicts it has announced thus far. I say this because some segments in Europe has been raising questions, casting doubts about the process and quality of the trial and the verdicts. Let me tell you that the tribunal has recently announced its verdict against a fourth convict who has been found guilty of offenses of crimes against humanity. We remain confident the tribunal would be able to proceed with the trials in an exemplary manner and deliver the long-awaited justice to the victims of crimes against humanity and protracted impunity. And there, as stated so many times, we remain open to constructive suggestions from our friends the world over in a spirit of ensuring due process and fair trial in keeping with best practices. I would only add that the ongoing trials and the work of the tribunal constitute a defining work for the state of Bangladesh and our entire nation. As I said, our people, particularly the youth, who are almost half of the population, have been most vocal on this. They do so to bring an end to a culture of impunity. And as the process is completed, this would not only establish us as an orderly and self-respecting nation, but also set us on course for a rule-based society and economy. Dear friends, as I come to Europe, I come with a heavy heart. A little over a month back, we met one of the most tragic incidents in our economic journey, where we lost over 1,100 precious lives. The tragic incident of building collapse, the earlier incidents of factory fire, and a host of related issues have shaken all of us in Bangladesh. This was most evident in the first few hours of a most spontaneous rescue by barefoot, ordinary individuals who rushed to the risky debris merely with their passion as possession. Many of them did not bother even to risk their own lives. The tragedy unified a nation like in 1971. But then, as resilient as Bangladesh remains known of, the nation also drew strength from an epic story of survival of a young worker, Reshma, after 17 days of the collapse. Cutting across all walks of life over the past 5 weeks since the tragedy, the nation and the state apparatus have resolved to bring critical changes. I have no hesitation in saying that neither the industry nor the state is in denial of whatsoever we were to act on as stakeholders. That's why in 10 days since the tragedy, together with the international community, the government, the employers, the workers adopted a joint declaration with support from the ILO. We have outlined specific measures to take in a time-bound manner. This has since become the singular reference point to reshape or reorder the entire export-oriented RMG industry in Bangladesh. In Brussels last evening, I met EU Trade Commissioner Karel Gucht. We discussed at length on all the related issues, candidly and openly. Following our meeting, we also issued a joint press statement which would further testify our intention and commitment. Also, tomorrow morning, I would be meeting with and speaking to the Foreign Relations Committee at the European Parliament on the contemporary situation in Bangladesh. Given the MEP's interest, I would obviously focus on the RMG industry. Still, let me tell you this much, that the Bangladesh RMG story is just not a matter of us exporting garments products to Europe and earning foreign exchange. This is an industry that liberated 4 million of our women who are at the bottom of development pyramid. It is much deeper, as the EU Parliament resolution recognized last week. EU not only remains a market for us, we have much deeper connections with Europe and each of the countries individually in so many other ways. It is a deeper and varied relationship. And we remain thankful to Europe and friends like you that at this difficult and challenging time, Europe appreciates and encourages us to correct affairs on the ground. That has most wonderfully been manifest by the adoption of the Accord of the European brands this month in Geneva. We are also looking forward to a major meeting this summer, as Karel Gucht mentioned yesterday. On our part, as I said, we in the government pledge to do our fullest, involving all stakeholders. And there, with the expected passage of the amendments to the Bangladesh labor law in Bangladesh Parliament next month, we would be able to make a major leap forward. Dear friends, today independent Bangladesh is 42. In our initial years, Bangladesh was most often referred for floods, poverty, etc. But in the 4 decades of journey, we proved many theories and pundits wrong. Bangladesh showed that despite so many challenges and limited resources, it is possible for a low-income country to achieve significant progress in key social indicators. Bangladesh is now rated for health profile of women and children, primary and secondary education, especially for girl child, overall empowerment of women. Bangladesh economy continues to expand on a sustained footing. For a decade, Bangladesh economy has grown at a sustained 6%. With a GDP of $120 billion, we have the 3rd largest economy in South Asia. Our export is rising in value and in products. Our private sector is stepping into a new range of production and in new markets. We now produce high value-added, technology-intensive and world-class products in pharmaceuticals, porcelainware, furniture, light engineering, and of late, ocean-going vessels. We are also coming up in ICT sector. Export of software and related services promises much. Various global assessments thus consider Bangladesh as the next growth story. Much of it is manifested in a higher credit rating for Bangladesh. During the economic crisis in Europe and the US in the past years, Bangladesh stood resilient. We even could increase our overall exports. The true resilient Bangladesh is mostly reflected in Bangladesh agriculture. in production of over 33 million tons of food grains, we actually increased our food production more than 4 times in 4 decades, while our arable land is shrinking. Actually, agriculture production has grown faster than our population growth. Only last week, we estimated this year Bangladesh would have to import just around 20,000 metric tons of rice, the lowest in last 16 years. In fine, much of present-day Bangladesh is a result of a combination of prudent policies of the government, a vibrant civil society and press, and the state's appreciation of their role, a booming private sector, drive and innovation of entrepreneurs, and the youth. The road ahead is promising, as we have a very young and trainable workforce, basic skills of the workforce, and a rising private sector. In terms of values, we take pride in our democratic governance, institutions, and practices in public affairs. If not anything else, this is surely manifest in having 15,000 women elected at the lowest tier of local government, 20 MPs elected directly, 50 elected against reserved seats in the parliament, 5 cabinet ministers, the Speaker of the House, the Deputy Leader, the Leader of the Opposition, and of course, the Prime Minister, all women. The other dimension of Bangladesh is her strategic depth. This is what is drawing Europe, the US, China, India, and many others to Bangladesh in recent times, in spite of all you may read or hear in the public domain. This was echoed just 3 days back at the second partnership dialogue that Bangladesh and USA held in Dhaka. Bangladesh must not, therefore, be viewed as a market of 150 million people alone. Having Southeast Asia and Far East to our east, we have major producer economies of the world. Bangladesh is to be viewed as a natural gateway and emerging production and distribution hub. To further all, our government launched Vision 2021. The idea and objective is to transform Bangladesh into a middle-income country by the time Bangladesh turns 50. I would close by underlining that Bangladesh not only stands as a resilient, dynamic, skillful, and innovative people and an emerging economy, she also offers a strategic hub in a burgeoning Asia-Pacific region in the 21st century. Here is a state and people who pledge to develop themselves for their own betterment. Here is also a state with a commitment to contribute to the global stage with values, ethos, ideas, initiatives. This is the Bangladesh of the present and of the future to emerge. I thank you all for your kind attention.
Hi everyone, if you like the video, make sure you subscribe so you never miss out on a video again. It's right here.